Que m'importe que tu sois sage? That's what we're going to talk about. Que m'importe que tu sois sage? What is it to me that you are wise? Be beautiful and be sad. Dona Flor Seleção, Brazilian Maduro. And the type to take off the labels, that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to talk about this thing I want to talk about. I smoke this cigar, so strap in. Uh-oh, I have to leave this one in for a while. See, I don't want to because I'm going to use my cigar holder. Be beautiful and be sad. I was listening to my playlist, and on came a song that I listened to a lot in the late 1990s. I don't know how many of you guys remember Pedro the Lion. But man, that was my sweet jam. He had an EP called Progress, I think. And one of the songs, a girl commits suicide. It's actually this man telling the story to another man or a boy about how his mother died. His mother gave birth to him in the song. Left the baby in the little bin, went to the top of the hospital, left off. Hit the ground, died of course. When the policeman comes around, he takes more than 50 eyewitness accounts, each one in awe, because they'd never seen a girl so sad and beautiful speeding toward the ground. Sad and beautiful. Is there such a thing? Is it possible? In particular, is it possible for a Christian to be sad and beautiful? Christians like to talk about joy, 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 joy down in our hearts. Where are my matches? Dang it. Oh. Alright, press pause. I've got the peace that passes understanding down in my heart. So maybe I don't want to talk about sadness. I want to talk about joy. Christians do have a notoriously difficult time dealing with suffering, sadness, and pain. As did Israel of old. That was what was so shocking to the disciples. And talking about the widow and her two mites. It seemed rather obvious to them that the blessings of God meant that you would have money. And if you had money and you were disease-free, you had been blessed by God. You were not under a curse. Just on the face of it, an obvious thing, and then Jesus rolled along. So we're always trying to push sadness out to the boundaries of the Christian experience, not wanting to admit it to the table. But Jesus himself said when Jesus wept over Jerusalem because he knew its fate. Shortest verse of the Bible. Everyone knows it. In Gethsemane. Jesus says that he is leaving for his suffering. In John, he doesn't say he's leaving to be crucified or to face his death. It's actually not in Gethsemane, it's at the supper. He says that he's leaving to go suffer. Lots of sadness for Jesus. Christians need to embrace sadness, need to know that sadness is a part of life. There are many things to be sad about. Joyfully sad about, grievously sad about. And for the record, sadness is not the same thing as depression. You cannot be depressed and not be sad, I think. I think that's a fair thing to say. But you can definitely be sad and not be depressed. Sadness is an aesthetic response. It's a feeling, or perhaps an emotion, although I don't like that. Gone out in response to immediate circumstances or to prolonged circumstances. But depression, I think, can be something that, ooh, I'm not going to break this chair. It comes from within. Depression, being trapped by sin or some kind of brokenness. Recall the recent video I did. And not being able to get out of it, being overcome by that. As Pedro the Lion suggested in that song, sadness is an appropriate response to the sublime. But I want to go back and examine the circumstances in which that thought was penned, or the circumstances laid out in the piece of art, to which the response is supposed to be seeing sadness and beauty. So this girl is falling from a roof. She knows she's going to die. She knows she's just abandoned her child. And she is beautiful. And she is sad. The sadness she can feel herself. It is possible that the people who witness her fall project sadness into her because of what she's doing. But one assumes that the artist is telling us she was sad, and it was visible. You could see that she was sad. But she was beautiful, and that is not up to her. Right? The viewers, the witnesses, decided that she was beautiful. And I think it's suggested in the song, in this piece of art, that not only is she herself beautiful, but the act she is committing lends her beauty. So her suicide, her falling from the ceiling in a flutter of sheets, is somehow a beautiful thing. Now, what is salutary about this is that it acknowledges that grief and sadness can be beautiful. It acknowledges that death can be beautiful. And I think even Christians could admit that deaths that are not intended to bring God glory can be beautiful. So a warrior wades out into the ocean to meet the raiders and is cut down. He knows he's going to be cut down as he wades out. Crying out to Thor. Cursing the men who have come to kill him and his people. There's something beautiful there. But there's something horrifically ugly about the picture that Pedro the Lion is drawing in this song. That is obscured by our romanticism, by our desire to be touched by the sublime as defined by the romantics of the late 18th century. That's some good smoke right there. I need to slow down on this bad boy. What on earth? So, David Bazan, who wrote that song, who was Pedro the Lion, for 3 or 4 albums, he was a Christian. He wrote albums, thematic albums, tight concept albums. That were, one album was a story, absolutely incredible, about faith, the church, being a new Christian, hypocrisy and sin. He was never able to come to terms with hypocrisy and sin. And not in the way that St. Paul could never allow himself to be content to let the flesh take over. No. You could tell he was having a hard time accepting what grace did, and that he sinned and that others sinned. Nothing remarkable so far, right? I mean, that is a struggle of many Christians. It is a Christian struggle. But after 3 or 4 albums, because he was telling an overarching story as well, people started to ask him, where's this thing going? Is this going to end up being the Christian story that we thought it was going to be? So then the prevaricating began, and a couple more albums came out. Where you could tell he was kind of sitting on the fence. You could tell he was beginning to wander from the faith, rejecting Jesus. And so all he did was dwell on the hypocrisy of people, of Christians, of himself, sure, but of others. It's mostly what he dwelt on. And then boom, he comes out, I'm no longer a Christian, changing the name of the band, etc., etc. I think the seeds of all of that are evident in his aesthetic vision, not just in the theology that you can pick out from his lyrics, or the emotional turmoil you could hear in his music. Because the way he visualized sad and beautiful is extremely pagan. It is not possible to think that a woman jumping from a building is beautiful without doing yourself some serious harm, all right? Without abstracting yourself from the situation to the point that you are no longer human. For example, you might be able to look at a girl jumping out of a hospital window in her hospital gown and think how the fluttering gown makes her look like a butterfly. And that's beautiful. You see scenes like that in modern cinema all the time, except that it's not beautiful because it's not a butterfly. It's one thing to use a sort of imagery that our brains want to respond to. Visually, boom, aesthetic cortex being hit. To use that to disturb us into considering the scene is one thing, but to actually say, this is beautiful, this is a beautiful thing, requires abstraction too much. Or it requires an unholy glee in satanic things. It requires that one be lucky, that one appreciate chaos, mischief, and evil over good. And as a subset of that, third thing, you could find such a scene beautiful if you believed there was no God and there was no meaning to life. So that you were in the act of leaping out of this window, you are writing a poem in the sand that a few people will see, and then it will be scuffed away by passers-by or by the water. You're registering your objection with the universe. And of course, the universe callously doesn't hear you. But the fact that you took the time to register your objection to how the world is with the universe is itself a beautiful thing. This is a very French, godless, heathen attitude. And I say French because we're going to go full circle to that "que m'importe que tu sois sage, que tu sois sage." Not easy, parlaying les français. What does it matter to me that you are wise? Be beautiful, be sad. Baudelaire, les fleurs du mal, the flowers of evil. Now, I've been a Christian basically my whole life. I became a Christian as a young child. So when I tell you that in my teens and 20s I listened to the Smiths or Peter the Lion, that I read Charles Baudelaire, I tell you that I did these things as a Christian, there's something about this nihilistic attitude of finding, of just stating, just basically saying to the universe that saying no to the universe is a beautiful thing. I mean, you have to find meaning in life, and that meaning you have to have beauty. But that attitude, I confess, I find very charming. The courage of a man without God. And make no mistake, some are courageous. There's a courage I just cannot understand. To even have the energy to say, be beautiful and be sad, is more than I can fathom. But these sorts of things, this sort of attitude fascinates me, really. So let's talk about Baudelaire's poem here. This is my library, now that I've moved countries. Sad Madrigal is the name of this poem, written in the mid-19th century. And I have to say that I don't love this translation. Thank you for allowing me to say that. I will now read this. The first couple of lines, I gotta say with my translation, I prefer, but after that I have to rely on this. But enough of that, because I'm distracting from the point. That is language nerd me getting in the way, and I apologize. We're going to read this poem. We're going to talk about what it takes to actually truly say, be beautiful and be sad. And then we're going to sign off. Gloomy Madrigal. 1. What is it to me that you are wise? Be beautiful and be sad. Tears add a charm to the countenance as a stream does to a landscape. Storms make the flowers fresh again. I love you most of all when joy flees from your oppressed brow, when your heart is drowned in horror, when the frightful cloud of the past is spread out over your present. I love you when your large eyes shed tears as hot as blood, when in spite of my hand which lulls you, your unbearable pain comes through like a dying man's death rattle. I breathe in heavenly pleasure, profound, delightful hymn, every sob from your breast, and I believe your heart lights up with the pearls that your eyes pour out. There's part 1. 2. I know your heart, overflowing with old uprooted love, still blazes like a forge, and that there smolders in your breast something of the pride of the damned. But my sweet, so long as your dreams have not reflected hell, while in a nightmare without respite, dreaming of poisons and daggers, enamored with powder and steel, answering the door fearfully, seeing misfortune everywhere, convulsing when the hour strikes, you have not felt yourself embraced by irresistible disgust. You cannot, slave and queen, who love me only with terror, in the unhealthy night's horror, say to me, your soul full of cries, I am your equal, O my king. So, Baudelaire doesn't care that this woman is wise. He just wants her to be beautiful and sad. And then he talks about how he perversely enjoys her grief, her sadness, her confusion, her turmoil, her regrets, past lovers he talks about, past loves I should say. He gets off on that. And I know that your heart overflowing with old uprooted love still blazes like a forge, and that there smolders in your breast something of the pride of the damned. But my sweet, so long as your dreams have not reflected hell, but they have reflected hell. I myself admit, I confess to you, brother, that I have enjoyed the suffering of others. I've enjoyed the suffering of my own wife. It's very easy to get off on that. People's pain. And it's satanic. The beauty of sadness without God is the beauty of better a king in hell than a slave in heaven. And underneath that lurks horror. A king in hell is a slave to his own lusts. He's a slave to making others slaves. Be beautiful and be sad without God is enslaving. Because you're getting off on suffering. You are deciding that you can find beauty in the red jacket in Schindler's List without God. I'm not going to talk about Spielberg or any of the other viewers. Between you and I, can that little red jacket be beautiful without a God who saves the world, who redeems the world? It just can't be possible. That must be ugly. Doesn't matter how prettily you dress it up, how many violins are on the soundtrack. It is ugly without a Savior. But to be beautiful and to be sad with a Savior is to put everything in its right place. It is to acknowledge that the death of a child can be beautiful. Without fleeing from the ugliness. It is even to acknowledge that ugly things with no salvation on their level from ugliness work together toward a beauty. Right? We at least pretend toward, to use the old-fashioned sense of the word. We pretend toward a meaning, toward an eschaton. And without that, how could we ever say that anything sad could ever be beautiful? It cannot. But with Jesus, sad things could be beautiful. And one day all sad things will come untrue, as the good Samwise Gamgee said. All right, all. I'm going to enjoy this stogie. Peace be upon you.